Welcome to Conflict of Interest for another week. I'm Greg Barnes. This is Peter Farris. And tonight we're talking about Afghanistan, the war in Afghanistan. We know less about Afghanistan, I think, than we do about Iraq, but Professor Richard Tanter from the Nautilus Institute at RMIT, and who's also the co-author of the Australian Afghanistan briefing book, which you can actually get on the net, a very useful publication, will talk us through what's happening in Afghanistan, because Australia does have troops there. Peter, Afghanistan doesn't seem to get the same amount of press as Iraq. It doesn't have as many journalists there, but it does seem that we're not making, or the West is not making the progress that it thought it would make in Afghanistan.
Yeah, I think that's right. Let me take the first point. What happened with Iraq was that, for a whole lot of reasons we both understand, it was turned into a moral issue. And so it's been massively divisive all around the Western world as to whether America should have been in Iraq. And that's why we hear so much about Iraq, and it's debated endlessly. I can't recall anyone trying to debate Afghanistan. Whereas Afghanistan, the foreign countries went in under a UN resolution, which is what the Americans didn't have.
In Iraq.
Iraq, which is what the French and everyone else in the world complained about. So what I don't, at the moment, genuinely understand is why we've got this war, which has been going, 7 years, in a hot war, 7 years, UN sanctioned, and it's presumably going to go indefinitely. Now, must be the longest sanctioned, as it were, or legal or justified or just war ever.
Oh well, it's certainly a long one. It's not.
Well, it's longer than.
It's certainly long. Well, Iraq, it's longer than Iraq.
But Iraq's treated as being an illegal war.
Yeah, which it is.
Well, that's what you say.
Yeah.
But it's treated that way.
Yeah.
But you can't say. I don't think that Afghanistan's an illegal war.
No, it's not, because Afghanistan was done in terms of international law.
Yeah,
Afghanistan was done under that infrastructure.
But don't you find it extraordinary that what we've got here is really what amounts to an open-ended invasion?
Well, it's an open-ended conflict because there seemed to be there were three reasons for doing it. Well, there was one reason really initially, which was
they'd go
going after Osama bin Laden in Tora.
But that didn't take long.
Well, they didn't get him.
No, but that
didn't
pursuit.
Get him. And to get rid of the Taliban.
Well, that didn't take long.
And that didn't take long, but the Taliban is now regrouping, of course, particularly
in
the southern part of Afghanistan.
Why didn't it end when they'd, as it were, punished?
Well, I think the problem is that they went through this process of a new government with President Hamid Karzai, who really, as I understand it, really only controls Kabul, the capital, and little else of the country.
But that's all.
There's also in the West this obsession with the drug war, and that drives I think in a de facto sense a lot of what's happening in Afghanistan.
But any Afghanistani government is only going to control Kabul.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not the sort of country.
Well, and if any Afghanistani government is not going to wipe out the poppy crop, because so many people and so many villages.
The government won't wipe it out. It'll only be international forces that wipe it out.
And the moment they wipe it out, it pops up somewhere else, which is another topic, the war on drugs.
But what I'm getting at really is this, that, and I don't really understand the logic of this, I understand the emotion. 9/11 occurred. It was attributed to Al-Qaeda.
Yeah.
Al-Qaeda was living happily in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Therefore, the United Nations had an international force into Afghanistan to do what? Okay, to get rid of Al-Qaeda. Well, that was effectively done fairly quickly in the sense they were gotten out of any control or power in Afghanistan. And then, to punish the Taliban? Well, I don't really see why.
Well, I mean, I think after 9/11, when the US had enormous capital of goodwill after 9/11, you had that famous headline, I think, in Le Monde saying, from the French, saying we're all Americans now. It used that goodwill to get the Afghanistan insurgency going, if you like, the Afghanistan war going. By the time, though, it got to Iraq, Afghanistan had been going for over 12 months, and by the time it got to Iraq, it had botched most of the goodwill.
I just don't quite understand why it is that the UN didn't say, okay, you've been into Afghanistan now for 2 or 3 years, you've achieved what the resolution sought to achieve, it's got to stop.
Well,
why is it open-ended?
Well, because I think that the security situation in Afghanistan is so bad, it's almost a chicken and egg situation. I mean, it's a bit the same as Iraq. I mean, in Iraq, prior to the latest surge in troops,
which has succeeded.
Which has partially succeeded. And in fact, General David Petraeus, who was responsible for that surge, is now going across to Afghanistan.
Yeah.
But that has been, to some extent, successful. In Afghanistan, the problem is, as I said, Hamid Karzai is a weakened president. The Americans have been accused of killing civilians. That's making Karzai's job difficult. We've got the Taliban regrouping in the south. And, of course, you've got the instability of Pakistan.
Oh, well, you've got the Taliban in the north living cross-border with the Pakistanis.
Well,
and the Americans are invading Pakistan. They're attacking northern Pakistan, technically.
Yeah, and that, of course, has created fury in the Arab world in particular, and also particularly in Afghanistan. So the Americans' tactics, as usual, as I would say, counterproductive, heavy-footed and counterproductive, and making life more and more difficult for Afghanistan. So it's almost as though it's a catch-22. The Americans say they want to clean it up and they want to get out of the place, and NATO wants to get out of the place, but their actions are going to make sure that they stay there a lot longer.
You can say that because you and the left are so much smarter than the Americans.
Well, I don't think it takes much to be smarter than the Bush administration.
Well, you're much smarter than George. You went to Yale, didn't you?
George got...
What university did you go to?
George got into Yale.
What university did you go to?
George got into Yale because his old man was, his old man, you
bankroll
yourself into Yale.
I bet you wouldn't have got to Yale, I wouldn't have.
And I don't think George did very well at Yale.
George did well at Yale.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, he did well at Yale.
And then had a number of failed businesses.
Well...
Let's get back to Afghanistan. I want to hear from Richard Tanter on one issue in particular, which I think is very important, and that is the issue of how long is this conflict going to go?
Yeah. This is the point I was making at the beginning. At the moment, it looks to me like it's open-ended, and I don't hear anyone we hear people all around the world saying the Americans have got to get out of Iraq.
Yeah.
Hear that constantly.
Yeah.
But you don't really hear anyone saying...
NATO's got to get out of Afghanistan.
United Nations
Although, as I understand it, in the countries that are taking the hits, in other words, the dead bodies...
But that's because they've got bodies.
There are, that debate, Canada...
But it's not the same moral issue, and I don't quite understand. I would have thought they're pretty much the same.
Well, let's get Richard Tanter on. Let's talk about it.
Okay, we'll be right back.